Welcome back, and now for the news in detail. In occupied Kashmir, Indian occupation forces have killed a youth and wounded dozens of others after they opened fire on mourners in the Pulwama district. They were rallying against the killing of freedom fighter Riaz Naiko by Indian forces on Wednesday. The all-party Hurriyat conference called for a general strike in the occupied territory today. Authorities disabled mobile internet services across the valley to forestall large crowds from gathering in the streets. Indian forces have martyred 19 Kashmiris over the past 2 weeks in different parts of the valley. Occupied Kashmir has been reeling under New Delhi's curfew and communications blackout since August last year. Pakistan has rejected India's baseless allegations of infiltration attempts, which New Delhi is using as a pretext for a false flag operation. At a press briefing in Islamabad, the Foreign Office spokesperson said Kashmiri people are suffering due to India's so-called search operations. Aisha Farooqi said India must realize it cannot suppress their indigenous resistance movement through the use of force. Occupied Kashmir has been reeling under a curfew for over 9 months, following India's revocation of the special status of Kashmir as a disputed territory. Pakistan's Prime Minister Imran Khan says the COVID-19 related lockdown in the country will be lifted in phases starting from Saturday. Addressing the nation, Khan said the decision was made because of the lockdown's impact on the poor segments of the society. He urged the people to take responsibility for their safety and follow the SOPs issued by the government. He warned that if people fail to follow the guidelines, the government would be forced to enforce the lockdown again. Markets will now remain open for 5 days a week, but the reopening of schools has been delayed. 38 people have died from COVID-19 since yesterday, raising the country's death toll to 564 with over 24,000 confirmed cases. Nearly 6,500 patients of coronavirus have recovered so far. Meanwhile, Pakistan has repatriated about 2,459 nationals between the 1st and 5th of May. In Spain, the daily death toll from the novel coronavirus has fallen to 213, bringing the total to over 26,000. Earlier, the United States reported nearly 2,000 deaths in a day, pushing the country's overall total to more than 73,000. Globally, the number of deaths from the virus has exceeded 263,000, with over 3.7 million people infected. More in this report.
Across the United States, governors are rolling out a patchwork of constantly evolving plans to relax social distancing restrictions. But officials in Washington are expressing concern over reports of people organizing COVID-19 parties to intentionally spread the virus. In a reversal of its earlier position, U.S. President Donald Trump said the emergency task force handling the outbreak will continue its work indefinitely. New York Governor Andrew Cuomo said that the states that are reopening their economies despite rising infection rates are making a mistake.
It's not a question of do we reopen, it's a question of how we reopen. That's really the question that we have to grapple with and that we're dealing with in New York. Our position in New York is the answer to the question, how do we reopen, is by following facts and data as opposed to emotion and politics.
Brazil's health minister says for the first time that lockdowns may be needed in the country as daily cases and deaths hit new highs. The country's Senate approved $10.5 billion aid package for the nation's cities and states. The World Health Organization says strong and resilient health systems are the best defense against pandemics, and
now is an opportunity to lay the foundations for resilient health systems around the world, which has been ignored for long. If we learn anything from COVID-19, it must be that investing in health now will save lives later.
South Korea's largest airline says it will resume some of its suspended flights to North America, Europe, and Asia next month. China has reported only 2 new coronavirus cases, saying both are imported.
U.S. envoy Zalmay Khalilzad and Taliban have discussed the implementation of the Doha peace deal in Qatar. The group's spokesperson Suhail Shaheen said chief negotiator Mullah Baradar Akhund led the Taliban delegation. The spokesperson said the meeting also focused on the speedy release of the prisoners and intra-Afghan talks. Meanwhile, the Afghan government said it has released 83 more Taliban prisoners in the past 2 days. National Security Council said 31 prisoners were released yesterday, while 52 others from Pul-e-Charkhi prison on Tuesday. Turkey says it has killed 3 militants of the Kurdistan Workers Party in an anti-terror operation in Andiaman province. The Interior Ministry said the terrorists were killed after a close encounter in the rural areas. It said the Provincial Gendarmerie Command conducted the operation. The ministry said Turkey will continue to destroy weapon caches and shelters used by the terrorists. It said operations are ongoing in the region. Turkey says its forces conducted the 9th joint patrolling with the Russian troops on a key highway in Syria's northwestern border. The Defense Ministry says the troops from the two countries carried out land and aerial inspections in Idlib. The patrolling is a part of an agreement brokered between Turkey and Russia on March the 5th in Moscow. The presidents of both the countries agreed to a ceasefire and military patrolling to ensure truce in the region. The Syrian government has been accusing Turkey-backed rebels of breaching the cessation of hostilities agreement. Turkey said it aims to create a safe zone for displaced Syrian refugees at the border front of Idlib. US President Donald Trump has vetoed the congressional resolution seeking to limit his war powers against Iran. The House of Representatives passed the resolution in an attempt to stop Trump from further military action against Iran. In a statement, President Trump called the resolution very insulting. He said it was introduced by the Democrats to win the presidential election by dividing the Republican Party. The president said the resolution is unnecessary because it rests upon a faulty premise. He said the legislation is dangerous as it can hinder the president's ability to protect U.S. forces, allies, and partners. The president said his administration has taken strong actions within the statutory authority to keep America safe. Iraq's parliament has approved the cabinet of Prime Minister designate Mustafa al-Kadhimi after 6 months of political uncertainty in the country. The parliament approved 15 ministers out of a prospective 22-seat cabinet in a vote of confidence. Ministerial candidates for the ministries of Justice, Displacement and Migration, Agriculture, Trade, Culture and Tourism were rejected. Voting on the oil and foreign ministries was postponed because no candidate was determined. Al-Kadhimi and the 15 approved ministers were sworn in the parliament. Iraqi President Barham Salih appointed Al-Kadhimi as Prime Minister designate on April 9. According to Iraqi constitution, Al-Kadhimi was required to form a government within 1 month. China says it opposes American and some other countries' attempts of politicizing the coronavirus pandemic to attack Beijing. Responding to U.S. President Donald Trump's comments, the Chinese Foreign Ministry said Washington's enemy is the virus, not Beijing. Earlier, Trump blamed China for the virus spread, saying it has hit the U.S. harder than the Pearl Harbor bombing in World War II and the 9/11 attacks. The deepening rift between Washington and Beijing was further underscored by Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, who renewed his rhetoric against China. Pompeo said there is enormous evidence that coronavirus hatched in a Chinese laboratory, even while acknowledging there is still uncertainty about its origins. However, China asked the US to stop spreading false information about COVID-19.
The claims that China is concealing the epidemic situation, delaying notification to the world, and making benefits from the outbreak are sheer nonsense, which are scotched by facts. We want to urge the US side once again to stop spreading false information, stop misleading the international community, take a good look at its domestic problems, and try to find out ways to control the pandemic in its country as soon as possible, rather than continue playing the blame game.
The U.S. military says it killed 132 civilians and injured 91 others during its global operations in the year 2019. In a report, the Pentagon said these figures are from the U.S. military operations in Iraq, Syria, Afghanistan, and Somalia. The Pentagon said no civilian casualties were identified in operations in Yemen and Libya last year. It said most victims were in Afghanistan, with 108 deaths and 75 injured. The Department of Defense said it takes responsibility for the deaths of 22 civilians and injuring 13 in Iraq and Syria. Multiple NGOs regularly publish far higher death tolls of American strikes in the war zones. Venezuela's government has broadcast a video of U.S. citizen confessing to plotting to overthrow President Nicolas Maduro. U.S. citizens Luke Denman and Aaron Berry are among the 13 people arrested after an alleged armed incursion was foiled over the weekend. In the video, Denman said his mission was to seize control of the airport and bring in a plane to fly Maduro to the U.S. Denman said he and Berry were contracted by a U.S. military veteran who leads a Florida-based Silver Core firm to carry out the operation. Venezuela said it will seek extradition of Jordan Godo, who has admitted involvement in the operation. Earlier, U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo said Washington will use every tool necessary to free Americans held in Venezuela. Washington has also denied its involvement in the failed armed incursion. Nigeria says its forces have killed at least 343 Boko Haram militants during military operations conducted within 6 weeks. The defense headquarters said key leaders of the group were also killed in the operations. In a statement, the defense authorities said several other terrorists suffered gunshot wounds. It said most of the Boko Haram's logistics installations and networks were destroyed. Authorities said 16 informants and logistics suppliers were arrested in this period. They said some Nigerian soldiers also died and others were wounded in the action. Kenya says the death toll from the floods and landslides caused by heavy rains has surged to 194. The government says heavy downpours during the rainy season have wreaked havoc all across the nation. The government said flash floods, landslides, and sinkholes have left thousands displaced, livestock dead, and crops destroyed. It said all floods affected persons in various camps will be issued with face masks, while clean water will be provided through water bowsers. Officials' figures indicate that this year's floods are the worst Kenya has witnessed in years. Authorities have urged residents to move to higher ground and allow the construction of proposed dams and dikes by the government as a long-term solution. More stories to follow right after a short break. Stay tuned. Welcome back. In India, 9 people have died while over 5,000 people fell sick after toxic gas leaked from a chemical plant in the southeastern state of Andhra Pradesh. The official said residents of Visakhapatnam reported breathing difficulties. Local officials said styrene gas leaked from the plant during the early morning hours when people in area were asleep. The administration said hundreds of people have inhaled it and fell unconscious. It said 1,500 people have been evacuated, mostly from a neighboring village. The authorities asked citizens in the area not to come out of houses for the sake of their own safety. They said areas within approximately 3-kilometer radius of the plant are vulnerable to the leaked gas. In India, more than 80 border security force personnel and hundreds of police officers have tested positive for the novel coronavirus, raising alarm for stretched force. A senior BSF official said a total 154 border security force personnel have been affected. A senior BSF official said the cases were reported from units in Delhi, Jodhpur, Kolkata, and Ambassa in Tripura. Meanwhile, police in western state of Maharashtra said the number of cases has nearly doubled in the offices there in the last week. They said over 450 officials from the state police force have now tested positive and 4 have died due to the virus. India has reported 1,783 deaths and 52,952 coronavirus infections across the country so far. In the UK, Prime Minister Boris Johnson will review the COVID-19 lockdown with his cabinet today after suggesting some rules can be eased from Monday. By law, the government must review restrictions every 3 weeks, and the latest deadline ends today. Johnson will address the nation over the weekend to outline plans for the next stage of the lockdown. It is understood the stay-at-home message could be scrapped, with ministers keen to restart the economy. But Johnson has also said the government has to be sure any changes to the restrictions are backed by data.
It would be an economic disaster for this country if we were to pursue a relaxation of these measures now in such a way as to trigger a second spike.
Johnson also pledged to increase testing to 200,000 a day by the end of this month as the UK became the worst hit country in Europe. Now moving on, the WHO has warned of the risk of returning to lockdown if countries ending pandemic restrictions do not manage the transition properly. Director General Tedros Ghebreyesus says countries should plan lifting restrictions in phased approach. Addressing a virtual briefing in Geneva, the WHO chief listed a series of steps needed before countries lift preventive measures. These include surveillance controls and health system preparedness. He also said that it was not possible to return to business as usual when the pandemic eventually ebbs, stressing the need for investment in health systems. Tedros said he will conduct an after-action assessment of the agency's response, but wait until pandemic recedes to do so. He defended the health agency's record on warning about the potential for human-to-human transmission. Astronomers have spotted closest black hole to Earth ever discovered and are surprised about its living arrangements. Researchers say the black hole is residing harmoniously with two stars in a remarkable celestial marriage that may end in a breakup. Chile-based European Southern Observatory astronomer Thomas Revenius said formation of a black hole is a violent process. He said most models would not have predicted a triple system could survive that, but rather would fly apart. Researchers said black hole is over 4 times the mass of the sun and gravitationally bound to two stars. They said so-called triple system is roughly 1,000 light years from Earth. This triple system, called HR 6819, can be seen from Earth's southern hemisphere with naked eye in the constellation Telescopium. The Bank of England has warned that the UK economy is heading towards the deepest recession on record. The impact of the coronavirus meant the economy would shrink 14% this year based on the lockdown being relaxed in June. The bank said the housing market had come to a standstill while consumer spending had dropped by 30% in recent weeks. The governor of the bank, Andrew Bailey, said there would be no quick return to normality. He described the downturn as unprecedented and said consumers would remain cautious even when lockdown restrictions are lifted. While UK growth is expected to rebound in 2021 to 15%, the size of the economy is not expected to get back to its pre-virus peak until the middle of the next year. The British government is expected to start easing lockdown restrictions next week. China's exports have unexpectedly jumped in April for the first time this year as factories race to make up for lost sales due to COVID-19 shock. Data from the General Administration of Customs show that exports rose 3.5% year-on-year, defying economists' forecasts. But Beijing's imports fell over 14%, signaling trouble ahead as the global economy sinks into recession. The increase was driven in part by rising exports of medical equipment, traditional Chinese medicine, and textiles, which include masks. China exported millions of tons of medical products worth over $1 billion in March-April period. Uber will lay off 3,700 staff, about 14% of its global workforce, as business plunges due to coronavirus shutdowns. The company said this in filings with the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission. Uber said the reductions will come from its customer support and recruiting teams and result in $20 million in severance pay and other costs. The announcements come a day ahead of the firm's quarterly results. Even before the pandemic, Uber was struggling to balance its books, making a loss of $8.5 billion in 2019. Executives in March warned the firm had seen demand for its taxi services fall by more than 60% in coronavirus hotspots. Earlier, Uber's subsidiary Careem announced it will lay off 536 employees this week, representing 31% of its workforce. And now the weather situation from around the globe. And that's all for now. For the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at Indus Special.